Hello and welcome to Tag1 Team Talks, a podcast of Tag1 Consulting. Today we're going to be exploring some of Tag1's work on the Drupal CMS and how Gander is being integrated as a foundational element in the next generation of content management systems. Developed by Tag1 in collaboration with the Google Chrome team, Gander's Drupal's official performance testing framework, ensuring that performance is a key consideration in Drupal development. Joining me today is Nathaniel Catchpole, Tag1 team member and Gander Project Lead. For over 20 years, Catch has been one of the most prolific and influential contributors to the Drupal platform. You don't know Drupal core if you don't know Catch. Welcome to the show, Catch. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, what are you guys doing?
I'm Michael Meyers. I'm the managing director at Tag1. Tag1 and our team are very active contributors to open source communities, and pretty much all of our work comes from organizations that reach out to us because of our contributions to projects like Drupal, including Gander. We build large scale applications with Drupal, as well as many other technologies for Global 500s and leading organizations in every sector, including Sumitomo, Boehringer Ingelheim, the New York Times, Stanford University, and the Linux Foundation. If you need help with your sites, platforms, or applications, please email us at info@tag1.com. That's TAG, the number 1.com. Thanks, Catch. I really appreciate you coming back for another update on Gander. Before we jump into all the work that you've been doing with the Drupal CMS team on Gander, there might be some listeners who aren't really understanding of what Gander is and how it works. So why don't we just step back and can you tell us what is Gander?
So what we do, we work with the Google Chrome team to figure out a way to measure Drupal's performance on a regular basis, which was something that we wanted in Drupal core for a very long time, since about 2009, 2010. The way that we implemented it is that we use Drupal's functional JavaScript tests, which run in a real browser, and then we collect data from the browser performance logs and also from the Drupal backend, like the site under test, and aggregate those and then allow assertions to be made on those within the test. So you can check how many CSS, how many style sheets are downloaded. Say for JavaScript, you can check how many images are on the page, but you can also check cache gets and database queries on the backend as well, and all from a single request. So it's not like you've got separate front end and back end tests. You can check, like you can set up a scenario and you can get data from as much data as we can collect, you can get from that one thing. And the reason we did it with PHP Unit is because it allows you to have repeatable tests. If you set up like a real site and then hit it, like the exact state of, especially the back end caches, but also the browser caches can be inconsistent between runs. Doing a PHP unit gives you like complete control over the site under test. So you know that the scenarios are the same every single time it runs. Unless you make a mistake, but at least there's a good chance to getting it exactly the same. And then it lets us fail test when things go wrong. So if we say this page has got 5 database queries, and then something goes into an MR and it makes 6 database queries, the test fails. So it's not like you've just got a line somewhere that you can look at once a month. Like you get immediate feedback, like even running tests on the command line, and especially on Drupal's like get that you see it straight away. And then the other part of it, there are some things that you can't really test on, like the largest and simple paint and time to first byte, like anything that's like counted in milliseconds, it's hard to do assertions on because it's never going to be the same every time. But those we send to an open telemetry dashboard built with graph, and those you do see on the graph, and that gives you comparisons between different kinds of scenarios and over time as well.
So you can write tests for pretty much all of the things integrated into your CI, pass, fail, warn based on certain conditions, and monitor the impact of performance on your application over time. And all this helps you catch problems early so that it's significantly easier to address them. And frankly, a lot of times performance problems aren't caught at all until they become a glaring nightmare. So this really helps you get ahead of the problem. How has Gander been used to date in Drupal core development?
So we added some tests of the standard and Umami demo install profiles in core. The idea, especially with Umami, it's got like default content, it uses views, it's got some like blocks around on the page and things like that. So it's the closest you can get within Drupal core of having a realistic site to test. What this means is by hitting pages in Umami, we're seeing the impact of a lot of different code that runs in Drupal core. So if something happens to views, we see that, something like that. So they're not very like low level targeted tests like unit tests. They're kind of very high level tests that hit a real page that does quite a lot, but then you pick up changes on that page and then you can track it down. And mostly like we've got, as I said, we've got like front end and back end assertions. So we're checking both what the front end performance of those pages is, how many JavaScript aggregates, how big the scripts and style sheets are, like how many bytes, and also how many database queries and cache gets and things like that. And then we track those on time. And then we've been gradually adding more capabilities to the performance tests and more test coverage as we find new issues or as we think of different things that we want to test.
So tell me about how you surface this data. I know there's a dashboard. Are there logs and local ways of viewing this? How do people see the data associated with this?
So if you introduce an issue that's going to cause a failing problem with one of the existing tests, you get like an immediate report on GitLab CI, and the test runs for about 5 to 7 minutes now. So any MR that causes a failure, you get instant feedback. It's like not something that you find out after the fact that it's gone into core. It runs on every single like MR commit. And then there's a public dashboard hosted by Tag1 that's like the Grafana dashboard. You can go in there and get an overview of how all the different tests look, how they're doing over time, and click through to like the Grafana tempo page, which has the database queries and cache things on there. So it's kind of two things, but I think most people who interact with it interact it when they cause a test to fail, because that kind of that's in your face. You don't have to go looking for that. It's yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about what it does and how it works. Is it working? Could you share some real world success stories of how Gander has improved things?
So the most recent improvements have mainly come via the testing embedded for Drupal CMS. So obviously Drupal core test can only test what's in Drupal core, and we there's a limited number of scenarios that are tested in Drupal core. Like Umami sets some things up, but it doesn't set up other things. So what we did just before Drupal CMS 1.0 launched, Tag1 funded some of the time to add some tests for Drupal CMS, and we like initially, I more or less still now, just test the basic starter recipe that Drupal ships with. So not all of the optional ones, because there's a few optional ones, just the main one that kind of, if you don't select any extra things, that's what you get. So it installs that, and then you visit the front page, and it logs in and it checks logged in and logged out and checks what that. And just from that test, it's like a couple of pages. It's a very short test. Must have found half a dozen issues, quite big issues as well. So the first one that jumped out when writing the test was there was a lot of JavaScript loaded for anonymous users, like about 300 kilobytes. And Drupal tends to be quite light on JavaScript. Like you often see 1550 kilobytes on the stock install, like something like a menu pop out or something little like that. But 300 is like a very heavy site, and it should not have been that heavy. So I looked at what it was, and it turned out it was the cookie consent recipe that shipped with Drupal CMS, which is a contrib module called Claro plus some configuration to set up on the site. So I opened an issue. I was like, "That this is on every page. Does it need to be?" And also found an issue. Someone beat me to it by 2 days, but I did find the same issue that they found with the performance test, that the library size was really big, like unexpectedly big. And then like the great thing was like within a couple of weeks that was fixed. Both issues were fixed. So they found out first of all that like not even the Drupal module, but the upstream Claro project had set the wrong flag when building one of the library variants that it ships, and just fixing that little flag upstream took it down from 300 kilobytes to 60. This is uncompressed. So compressed, you're talking like 15 or something. But so it's like what's that? 2/3, 4/5 reduction in JavaScript size. And then I think it's Jürgen Haas, I think is his name. He's the ECA maintainer on Drupal.org, who's also looking after the privacy recipe. He realized that, so what is Claro cookie consent management? It's only required if you have something enabled on your site that requires cookie consent. So Drupal CMS ships with YouTube embeds. So if you embed a YouTube video, it wants to check if you consent to having YouTube cookies before it shows you the video. But if you haven't actually embedded any YouTube videos on your site, you could upload one, but you haven't got any. So it doesn't need to check YouTube. But what it was doing was giving you the option to check YouTube consent when there were no videos on the site to consent to. So he rewrote the recipe so that it only adds each one when content is actually added that requires a consent. And it had already gone from 300 kilobytes to 60, and then it went down to 0. So the entire library is not loaded if you don't have one of those features, if you haven't uploaded content that requires a feature. And that means like just no JavaScript, like it's essentially free for anonymous users now. And it was really nice to find the issue. Sometimes you find performance issues and then like they don't get fixed. or, or it takes years, like years to figure out how to fix it. And it was nice that it was really quick. And it's not just fixing Drupal CMS. Like if you use a contrib module, everyone that been using that, when they update to the latest version, they will get a smaller JavaScript library. And you could implement the same logic as the recipe where it's like progressively enabled. So it just doesn't switch on for most sites that aren't embedding YouTube videos or whatever they need it for, but want it there for when they do. So that was good. Another one that for the logged in test, I used the editor role, and they get the Drupal navigation toolbar. So, and then that's a new experimental module in Drupal core. Because it's experimental, it's not in the standard or Umami install profiles in core yet like that, because that's what kind of ships when you switch it on. But because it's what will be in those, Drupal CMS wanted to early preview it and make it the default experience, give people something new. But it's still in development, and we knew that there was some caching issues to improve with it, but hadn't quite figured out what to do about them yet. But when writing the performance test, it went from one page to the next page, and you could see the navigation database queries like building the menus with both of those requests. And what I realized is that even though it's cacheable, Google's dynamic page cache would cache it. We were rebuilding the navigation, like the menu tree, on each different page. So if you go to the same page multiple times, you get a cache hit. But if you go from like admin page 1 to admin page 2, that's 2 copies of the cache. So we did 2 things to improve that. First of all, we made it independently cacheable away from the dynamic page cache. So it's got its own little entry, and that's global for the site based on your roles. And that means it only builds once for you for the entire site. You can go to 1,000 pages, and it's only actually built those menu trees once, and it's one cache entry. But then that still meant that the whole thing would end up in the dynamic page cache. So the HTML gets cached in your database like 1,000 times, even though it's all coming from one like nested cache entry. So what we also did was placeholdered it. So placeholdering means that instead of being embedded, like all of the HTML embedded in the dynamic page cache, it's just a little placeholder, and that gets replaced. And that meant that it would be loaded by BigPipe, which causes content layout shift. So we added a cache placeholder strategy to core to just load it from the cache when it's there instead of running it through BigPipe, which means that it's just loaded with the page, doesn't layout shift anymore. So it now means there's only one cache entry. The HTML isn't duplicated across all the different pages, and it's not janky. And it's like and that led to some Drupal core improvements. We didn't have this cache placeholder strategy, so you always had a choice of not placeholdering something or jank, like it would when your page loads and the sidebar comes in and stuff moves across. So we were able to find, by improving the navigation module, a way to improve Drupal core's placeholding strategy. So which means that you can have BigPipe enabled, and when you've got cold caches, things are slow, but they're loaded progressively, so the actual page feels fast. But once the caches are warm, you don't need that. You can just load like a string of HTML from the database, well, from the cache, and straight out to the page. So you get like you get the fastest possible experience when it's slow, but you also get a faster experience when it's fast. So it's like there's no trade-off between those. So it's been really exciting that from Just adding that little test of Drupal CMS, we went through all these different layers with the navigation module and improved like core rendering performance from that. And then the current toolbar in Drupal core that it replaces has like custom JavaScript. It uses like the browser, the local storage to avoid all of the problems that we found. But because it was built in Drupal 7, the capabilities that we have now were not available then. So it had to do a load of custom code, and like it's very complicated and very custom that the Drupal, what's in Drupal core now, the old toolbar. And navigation has no custom code for this. It's just using Drupal core APIs and like a few render array conventions, and it gets all of this like for free. So that's been like really nice to see, like just and it's yeah. And when we would have got that from Drupal core eventually, but we got it quicker because we tested it against Drupal CMS.
And I think that you found our new Drupal CMS tagline, now with less jank.
Yeah.
This is so exciting because this was the dream in creating Gander. And finally, like I said, since 2011 or earlier, we wanted to do something like Gander. It's so gratifying to hear. We have to do an episode. You know, I know you have more and we got to move on, but we have to do an episode just on these success stories because it's so cool to see how, even in its early days and stages, it's starting to fulfill that dream. And like originally, I think about some of the use cases you talk about. Oh, guardrails around like kilobytes of JavaScript size, and there are different use cases. But I have to admit, like the first time I heard you talking about, I was like, why would you need that, right? And there's like a really amazing example of how a simple test like that can catch a major issue and problem and lead to cascading benefits. And so there's Drupal, which happens at a large scale. Enterprises develop at a large scale. Like everybody can benefit from performance tests, but you can see how the different kinds of tests are going to benefit in different ways, and that's really cool. Uh, so you've been working on Gander as part of the Drupal CMS, and I know you've touched on a little bit of it so far. It's been a couple of months now. Can you just a little bit more detail on, okay, you had a bunch of stuff originally with Gander and its integration in Drupal core and what you're doing with core development. You touched on some of the Drupal CMS stuff. What has been the focus over the last 2, 3 months?
So we found a few things to improve with the performance, the testing framework itself. The one thing that was added 3 or 4 months ago was like database query assertion. So we used to assert the database query count, so to
Mhm.
see how many database queries ran. But then when one got added or removed, your test would fail, but you wouldn't know why. So you'd have to go in and see and debug and find out what happened. And then Christian Van A, I'm sure I've said his name wrong, but he added like a query log to the assertions. So you can say, I like these are the 5 database queries I'm expecting on this page. And if a
Mhm.
different one gets added, in your test failure, you see a diff. Oh, this one got added. And if you remove one, oh, this one got removed. And then most of the time, you just either add the line or delete the line because it's kind of what you're expecting. If it's unexpected, you don't have to go and get out the debugger. You get in the test, you can see what was added or what removed. Like it's getting close to the capabilities of like Drupal's devel query log and the web profiler module, which give you a query log for the page. But the difference is that when you're looking at like a normal site, you might have to click around quite a lot to actually find out where that query is. And then you still have to look at a list of 100 queries and then like mentally diff which one got added or removed. It's, oh no, there's 121. And then which one of those which one's a different one? And here it's, oh, that's the one that was added, that's the one that was removed. And then similar-ish, Sash Grossenbauer, Bernard on Drupal.org, who's the Redis module maintainer, he's been looking at Drupal's cache tag system. So we have cache tags of Drupal core was added in Drupal 8 very early on, and each cache item can be tagged with the things it depends on. So you've got a list of you render a node, and it's got its own little render cache, and that render cache is tagged with the ID of the node. So when the node is updated, the title changes or the image has changed or something, the cache item gets invalidated, and then you get a fresh copy. So you don't have to worry about like setting short TTLs. You can set permanent, you can cache it forever, and then the moment it's updated, it's going to be changed. That's been in Drupal core for a while, but the actual, because like we keep optimizing things, we got to the point where looking up the cache tags is actually quite a lot of the database queries on the page now. Like it can be like 20, 30 database queries to look up the cache tags. They're quick, they're very light queries, but it's if you're like in a database constrained situation and you're looking at like queries per second, the percentage of the queries per second that are cache tag queries, or even if it's like Redis, there's a certain point where you hit like per second request per second issues with Redis backend. Like the percentage is quite high. So you're trying to work out how to get rid of them. So he's added assertions, it's called like group cache tags. So it's essentially when you look up a cache item, say it's got 5 cache tags on it, we look up those 5. If we look up the next one and it's got the same 5 cache tags, we don't look them up because we already looked them up, like they're statically cached. But if there's one different, it will look that one up. So he's added that, and you can actually see on the page not only the database queries that are running, but also which cache tags are being looked up in which order. That means that they're like we're finding, and we from that we found ways to optimize the cache tag lookups. So things like blocks, they all have their own individual cache tag, but blocks are edited very rarely. So there's an issue to essentially remove that individual one and just have a single one for all blocks. So instead of 15, 20 lookups on quite a heavy page, you just have one. Cache tag preloading is getting added. So there's a few things that pretty much any request in fact, it's already in 11.2, that one went in. So any request to Drupal, like HTML request at least, is going to load like about 10 or 12 cache tags, and they're all separately for like quite low level cache items that are loaded individually. So what we did is we let modules like specify in their services.yaml, I want these cache tags preloaded, and then the first cache tag request preloads like 12, 15 in one query, and then they don't get loaded again. So instead of 12, 13, you've gone down to 1. And it was like you could do the optimizations before we had performance tests, but the only way to prove that you'd fixed the problem would be to like profile it with XHProf and then take a screenshot and then apply the change and then take another screenshot and then cross your heart and hope to die you hadn't made anything up or hit the wrong page. And it's very easy, like you'd see ones and it's obvious someone has like completely messed up the testing because they've hit it with a cold cache and hit it with a warm cache. And it's like, well, it's doing all this other stuff. There's no way you fixed all of that because that's different. And then, but with the form set, it's just like here's diff, like this happened. You can see exactly what change has occurred, and you can also see like when you haven't fixed it because it's not affecting the test. And it's like sometimes we find things that we can't performance test, but we're like as it's maturing, we're finding ways to test those things so that we can show it in the test coverage. So it's like the performance tests are driving improvements in some areas. Like when we test something we haven't tested before, then we find new performance issues to fix. But also, when we think of performance issues to fix, we can improve the performance test so that we can see the improvement or stop regressions. So it's like feeding into both sides of it feed into each other. And it's been really nice to see like the past 6, 9 months. It's really like it's coming together in a way that like is as good as you could have hoped, I think. There's plenty more to do and there's always things to fix, but it's getting easier to work on performance improvements. And you can see like 11.2 has got quite a lot of improvements, and I don't think we would have had those without it.
Wow. And a huge thank you to Sasha, Christian, everybody. Like to hear that people aren't just using Gander, but building out its features and capabilities, that's super cool. That's a really great thing to hear. And the impact that it's having is fantastic. So that's a good segue. What's on your roadmap? We're going to continue to invest in and integrate Gander into the Drupal CMS. What we don't need to get into like super long-term stuff necessarily, but just over the next, say, month, 2, 3 months, what do you have planned?
So in progress, we're trying to add Drupal CMS to the Gander dashboard. I actually nearly thought I got it working a week ago, but I don't think it's not quite there yet. I need to have another look. So it could have been there for today, but maybe next week. All the groundwork is there. It just needs to actually show up on the board. So that will be there like alongside Drupal core. And we were able to there was an issue with the dashboard for some, I think it's a quirk of how Grafana works. You had to run at least 3 tests an hour to get it to show a line, which is sounds really minor, but it was quite tricky and annoying. But I reworked the dashboard so that you can run tests like once an hour is fine, maybe even less frequently, that maybe every 4 hours. What it means is we can run a lot more different tests. So there was a bottleneck of because you have to run 3 tests an hour, the test takes 12 minutes, Drupal course test. you couldn't add more core branches to the dashboard because it would overload the performance test runner that's dedicated to performance tests. Now we're going to have multiple. So 10.4 and 11.1 are both on the dashboard now. Previously, it was only 11.1. We can add Drupal CMS on there. We could add like the development branch and the release branches to compare those. So that's all. So that's kind of part of it's done with just the actual Drupal CMS isn't quite reporting back as it should be yet. I'm starting to see the first contrib test. Actually works on the cache tag work. He also wrote a test for the redirect module. So redirect allows you to, like in your database, store redirects from one path to another. You usually use it with path auto so that when you change the path auto, like the path alias, you can redirect from the old one to the new one. But that does a database query on every request. Like every request, every page checks if there's a redirect. But there's a lot of pages that are never going to have a redirect. Like all your admin pages, no one redirects from one admin page to another. They don't use the alias and either. So and this was another issue that was found in the Drupal CMS test. So he's got an issue with an MR that adds like an allow list of paths that's dynamically generated so that the paths that it knows that there are no redirects from, it doesn't bother looking them up. And that's gonna, I mean, and if you think it's only one database query per request, but there are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of sites with the redirect module on, and every single PHP request that doesn't go through the page cache is a query. So that's, I don't know how many requests there are to Drupal sites a month. It's probably trillions. So it's like if you can remove that one, that's like a trillion database queries that will just never happen again, right?
Are you saying there are a lot of database queries? I had no idea.
It's like it's only like on in the request it's not a lot, but across every Drupal site everywhere, it's like it happens very often. So it's good. Sometimes the little changes that add up that way.
This certainly wasn't like the primary goal of building Gander, but it's an interesting outcome is that I don't want to call this a micro optimization, but if you think about the millions of websites that run Drupal, making a small optimization has a huge impact. That could be millions of websites that are doing a few less queries every time a page is built, requires less energy to build and serve a page. In aggregate, it does have, I shouldn't laugh, it is funny, but in aggregate, there actually is potentially a tremendous benefit. The other thing is like all these little things add up. Like oftentimes there is a disastrous entry or two that lead to a major performance problem, but because nobody looks at performance and certainly not at this level over time, your site's just like death by a thousand cuts. You just keep getting slower and slower and slower and slower every freaking release. And the next thing you are a quarter second, it has a material impact on your site, on your business, on everything. And so any way you look at it, you can of course prioritize where you expend your resources in addressing the problems that you find, right? You need to rack and stack and triage, but these little things should not be overlooked for many reasons.
Yeah. It's also say you've got five things that take 10 milliseconds each. Like it might be easier to fix than one thing that takes 50 milliseconds. Like it's not necessarily wasted work or just that it never hurts to do less. And it makes things easier to find as well. If you haven't got noise, if you can eliminate noise, even if it's not actually taking the time, then it's easier to find where your actual real problems are. But if you've got like a very noisy thing with like loads and loads, like it's like the cache tag queries. If you've got like 50 little cache tag queries, then like when you're looking at a devel log, you could miss the actual other database query that's in amongst them. If you've only got five, it's less to look at. So it's yeah, it's I always think it's worth cleaning those up and like minimizing so just little fetches. And it's also if your database is on a different server, you've got a bit of network latency is there. So stuff that's very minimal locally can be worse in production. If you've got like a millisecond lag and you've got 100 database queries, that's 100 milliseconds.
Yeah, that's a good point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Gander tries to normalize things by creating consistent environments, like you said, cache scenarios within which to test things. But it is just it's an example install. It's not a pure replica of your production environment. And so there are going to be differences, and a small problem could be a bigger problem in your production environment, another reason to potentially prioritize, address something that you might ordinarily think is smaller. What do you have going on? And what else is on the roadmap?
So we had a workshop back in DrupalCon Barcelona to add a lot more assertions to some of the existing tests and add some new tests. Quite a lot of people have been working on those over the past 2 or 3 months. They're starting to land and be RTBC, been reviewing those. So some of the very early tests, we weren't like asserting things like database queries and things like that. So it's just like adding in the detail that was there. There's a not directly related to performance testing, but in terms of like general Drupal performance improvements, we're building up to being able to use async in Drupal core. There's already some built-in support for fibers, but nothing in core actually does anything async for to take advantage of it. But people have been working on a my database driver that can execute async database queries. Once that lands, we could add support for that to views. So like long listing queries and views, which tend like on real sites, that is the thing, like the killer. Once you've got lots of data, it's very easy to make some very slow database queries. And you should optimize the queries, but what you can also do is file them off and do other things and then come back and get them later. So for perceived performance, it's useful to be able to do a bit of parallel processing. It's not real parallel, but async. So it's early days, but we are making like incremental progress towards it. So I think that will be what over the next year, that's going to be one of the bigger things coming through. And like for cold cache situations, Drupal is always like with a warm cache, Drupal is incredibly fast.
Mhm.
We did some comparative performance testing, not with Gander, just like manual against WordPress, so XHProf and Lighthouse and things like that. And Drupal came out ahead on almost every measure. WordPress will do 80, 90, 100 database queries where Drupal does 15, something
Mhm.
like that. But that was with like warm caches. But when you have like a completely cold start, there's so many things like plugins, the theme, registry, the router that have to be built before you can do things. Those take time. So if you've got like quite a heavy site and you do a full cache clear, it can be a second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds before any page gets served. And when you have large, high traffic sites that want to do lots of deployments, it can cause site outages. And async will should give us a lot of tools to massively improve those kinds of situations. Because it's instead of like progressively going through the page request, like every stampeding request getting blocked on the same things, we should be able to like slice and dice so that they can share them up. Got an MR that's should be ready to go in for cache pre-warm API. So when you hit something that's in the critical path, it can select something else that's in the critical path and do that first, and that would share the load between like different stampeding requests. So I think that's yeah, in terms of things that are in progress but aren't done yet, that's a big area that I think will come in over the next 6 to 12 months, and we should be able to performance test some of those things once they land as well.
Awesome. I'm really excited. The progress you guys have made to date is really exciting. We'll have to do another catch up in the near future. This is my morning and like you've already made my day. Like it's been so awesome to hear the progress that you've made, really. And everybody who's contributing to it and the solutions. Real quick before we wrap up, if there are developers out there that want to get engaged in this, are you looking for help? How do they find folks working on Gander and doing this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so if you look at the Drupal core issue queue and you check for the performance issue tag, a lot of the issues people work on are tagged with that. That's good way to see what's going on. There's also, I think, a performance test discovery for things that are specific to Gander. If you want to look at test writing, there's a meta issue for like, additional performance tests. We can link to that in the summary. Always getting and there's like full documentation for getting set up locally as well. If you want to like performance test for a module for distribution, then there's kind of instructions to get started with that.
Fantastic. Catch, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through all this. You really did make my day. I'm smiling. For everybody who's listening, we'll do our best to put a bunch of links into the show notes so that you can check out what we talked about. If you like this talk, please remember to upvote, subscribe, and share it out. And I feel like I watch every YouTube video and they're like, please upvote, click here. But it really does mean a lot to know that people not just only view this, but they liked it. So we sincerely appreciate it. You can check out our past and other team talks and other topics at tag1.com/TTT. That's three T's for Tag1 Team Talk. And we'd love your feedback, episode ideas. Please write to us at ttt@tag1.com. Again, when folks write in with things, it really is great. So appreciate your spending time with us today. Catch, thank you, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for having me on.